hit record, and let's first of all talk about your assignments. It's really important. So everybody look up here. Look, here's the deal. Um, in fact, best if I just go to the website and show you what we've done here. It's going to be a very chaotic end of the semester, no doubt, right? And so we're going to try to make it easier on our end in this class on you because it's going to be wild enough, right? Given everything that's going on. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this at the website here. Now, what I've done is I've made some key changes, right? Let me put this over here so you can see it a little better. All right, so I do have the Constitution at the top in case you need to reference it. I put the president's link there so you can find the presidents you need if you're doing that research paper. So I've left those, cleaned out everything else, and put these hard, in fact, I got this wrong. Let's make sure I get this right. This has got to be the 11th, right? Okay, so let's publish that. I'll use this unpublished version here for you. I got the date wrong. Not a good time to get the date wrong. Let's go ahead and refresh then. So let's be really careful then to make sure we know our deadlines, right? The deadline is, well, didn't come up, but here we go. Let's use this version here. The 11th. Everything's due on the 11th at midnight. The paper is due December 1st at midnight. Now, that will also be our early turn-in date. If you turn in the paper on that early turn-in date, I should have 10 days to try to get you feedback so you can fix it. Now, here's what I'm doing for you, and it's a favor. It's not a negative. You'll see already in the roll book that there is a 0 for all of the papers. Now, so far, I haven't put in any score at the top, but it's going to be about 200 points. In other words, it's going to swamp any other activity that you've done. And what will happen is I get the first research paper in. Let's say that first research paper is about 80% right. They've done a really good job, but they're missing a few things. So what I'll do is I'll give it some feedback, send an email back to that person, who then has until the 11th at midnight to make the fixes. Okay, it's going to be a lot of work on my part. We'll just keep working as hard as and fast as we can as those papers come in to give the people the time to make the fixes. But let's say it's 80%. I will put then 160 points in the roll book for that person. Now, that will let them know what their grade will be if they don't make the fixes. At that moment, though, everybody's papers turn to 0 out of 200 that haven't turned them in yet. This will tell you exactly what your grade's going to be if you don't get that research paper in. And look, this is a favor to you. You want to know. Information is power, right? You want to know the truth. I know there's going to be some students that say, I'm happy with a C. I don't want to do the research paper. But what if it turns into a D or an F? They're going to want to know that. I'm going to have some students who are happy with C's who aren't going to do the final study guides. There's going to be at least one, maybe 2 more study guides and the paper due. So there's still work to do. And they'll say, well, I don't want to bother with that. I'm happy with a C. Well, you better know that by not doing a certain assignment, what the outcome will be in advance. You don't want to show up on the 12th and say, how did I get a D when I thought I was getting a C or a B? Now, I'm not worried about the A students. I'm not, because the A students are going to do all the work and they're going to preserve their A no matter what. But for those who just want to get by, we need to let them know where they stand. So say you have an A, all of a sudden the paper turns to 0 because you haven't turned it in yet. All of a sudden you find out, oh my goodness, if I don't get that paper in, I've got a C+. I better get it done. So it's just a nudge to you and your parents to let you know what your final grade will be in advance. Okay, everybody clear on that? Raise your hand if you have a question. Now's the time to answer questions. Okay, so now I'm going to do another favor for you too. I already created a little lecture here, instructions for parents on the research paper, right? You may want to re-listen to that. I sent that home over the weekend. Now, here's the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to not bother to give you any questions from any lectures before today. We've had several lectures on the election. What I will do instead, starting with lecture 29, is I'll review everything that's important that would be in the study guide. So I would have, for example, it's an obvious one, right? How many electoral college votes did Biden win? 306. Okay, so that's an obvious one. It's going to be on the next study guide. But I'm not going to make you go back and search through all of these lectures clean back to here to figure that out. Instead, I will review everything you'll need for that last study guide or two right here. So you can simply start fresh. If I start paying attention from here and review these lectures with the study guide, I'm going to be fine on the last couple of study guides to make it easier for you. So you're not spending endless hours searching through past lectures to find simple answers. So I'll do that for you, make it easier. Okay, so we're making it easy, and we're also giving you a choice of topics for a specific reason. Mr. Trump has turned his presidency so toxic in the last 20 days by not admitting defeat. It's going to be hard to not just put him at the bottom of presidents. If you're a Trump supporter, you're going, what do I do with these facts? So I gave you a positive essay to write, one that's non-political about the vaccines. We'll cover a little bit more about that today. So that if you don't want to get mired in this mess of a presidency, you don't have to. You can talk about one of the truly great worldwide efforts to get us to herd immunity. And boy, I better see that term in that paper. So this president has been so toxic that I'm giving you an out and talk about something truly historic and on a worldwide scale, very important. All right, well, let's go through now to the regularly scheduled lecture. So everybody clear? No study guide questions. It starts right now, okay? Here on up, the last 4 or 5 lectures that we have, that will only be questions there. I'm not going back to ancient history here now, what happened 2 months ago or whatever. And also too, I will put zeros in the book to let you know what your grade will be if you don't get the research paper in and don't get those last couple of study guides in. I'll have some people that might have like 100%, and they might be able to just not do the last study guide because they've got so many points already, and it might knock their grade to 96% or something. And they'll say, that's fine, I still got my A, right? So some people can make those choices too. All right, so I'm trying to make it as easy as I can on you in the last 3 weeks of the semester, okay? And remember, you can do all of this work from home if you need to. So you're going to get your credit that you've earned, by the way. You've earned it this semester. You truly have. All right, well, let's go ahead now and talk about the craziness that this president has put us through when he loses this election and refuses to admit defeat and start the transition, which by law he has to trigger. He has to tell a group called the GSA, Government Accounting Office, right? He has to tell them to start the transition. And that way, it opens up the federal government to Biden's people coming in to get security clearances, to start talking to people, plan a transition, especially, and you're going to have to put this in your virus if you write about the vaccine, the transition of how to get the vaccines to people, that's got to happen by Biden's team. Trump's team's gone. So who's going to make sure the vaccines get out to America? And that's being held up. That planning should be going on right now. Anyway, this roller coaster of a ride was caused by one person. The chaos candidate 4 years ago, that's what he was called by Jeb Bush. The chaos candidate, as predicted by Mitt Romney at the time, will turn into a chaos president. And that is, if Woodward's going to write another book about how this presidency ended, it's got to be called Chaos. It's just been a roller coaster. We're 58 days away. Now, some of the news things I'm going to show you, we say 64, but that was because this happened earlier at the end of last week. We're 58 days. That can't come fast enough. We've got to get Mr. Trump to Mar-a-Lago as soon as possible because he's not focused on the issues of the American people. Every election of an incumbent president is a referendum on the incumbent. Now, you see why I'm reviewing with you? Because I think this might be something you'll have to pay attention to in your study guide. Basically, what happened in this election is the American people looked at President Trump's presidency and said, no mas, no more. And let's go ahead and look at the vote. You'll need to know this too. So I'm jumping ahead. As of this morning, Biden is now closing in on 80 million votes. more than any other president has ever received. And now look at the numbers, 6 million more than Trump. The 51% to 47, by my review, and I haven't checked all of them yet, I'm checking, but I can't think of any incumbent that lost, of the 8 that lost by this big of a percentage. When Reagan beat Carter, he won by 50.08, not 51. That's big in American politics. This right here is a decisive win, and there's no trying to change it, although Trump is trying to do that. He's trying to undermine this election every turn. Got over 30 law cases saying fraud, fraud. There's no fraud. They can't prove it in court. And now he's turning to Republican state legislatures and canvassers, people that count ballots, and trying to get them to halt the count, to turn the election and to overturn the vote of the people in those states. And instead have the state legislature put the electoral votes in Trump's hands and give them to Trump over the will of the people. Now, did you just hear what I just said? He's trying to go around the Electoral College. This whole situation came to a head, and this was Mitt Romney's comment on what happened. I need you to look at this comment. This is Mitt Romney of Utah, mild-mannered person, but he said this. What would cause him to say this? He said this right here. Here's his tweet on November 19th. He said this: having failed to make even a plausible case of widespread fraud or conspiracy before any court of law, they haven't been able to prove one case of widespread fraud that a state was rigged for Biden. It's not there. There's no evidence for it. Everyone says that, including many of these states, the elections are run by elected Republicans, like Georgia. The elected Republicans of Georgia counted, and Biden wins. And yet Mr. Trump is challenging them. Having failed to make even a plausible case of widespread fraud or conspiracy before any court of law, the president has now resorted to overt pressure on state and local officials to subvert the will of people and to overturn the election. He wants them to say, forget about the vote. You just put Republicans in and elect me president again. This is a dictatorial move, people. This is dictatorship at its core. It's Charles I saying, I'm the absolute ruler of England. And oh, by the way, Parliament, you don't have any say. No, this is not how it works. It is difficult. Listen to this line. It is difficult to imagine a worse, more undemocratic action by a sitting American president. And I got to be honest, he's totally right. This chaos president has just created more chaos. And so as we go look at the tape, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of show you, right, how this story unfolded over the last 4 days. Now we're over 20 days since Trump lost the election, and he's not conceding. He is holding out, going to court to try to prove that there's fraud when there isn't any. And the problem his lawyers have is you can't lie in court. Now listen carefully, look up here, everybody. You can't lie in court. If you're a lawyer and you knowingly present false evidence, you'll be disbarred and lose your license to practice law. That's why all these legal firms are now just leaving Trump's side, leaving him with just a very few lawyers who are even going to argue this case. So here's what happens here. Ready? Let's go ahead and drop back on the news back from November 21st. Here we go.
Credit the election results, even if there's another COVID outbreak in his inner circle. Garrett Hake reports.
President Trump spending much of the day at his Virginia golf course while his allies take swings at the election results, fighting to delay certification of votes in states the president lost, but claims he won. RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel and the head of the Michigan Republican Party sending this letter calling on that state's board of canvassers not to certify the statewide results on Monday as scheduled, but to pause 14 days for an audit of Wayne County's vote instead. Joe Biden carried Michigan by more than 150,000 votes. Tonight, 24 of the 36 legal challenges by the president and his allies have already been denied, dismissed, settled, or withdrawn, according to an NBC News count, including a lawsuit meant to halt certification of the results in Georgia, dismissed by a Trump-appointed federal judge. A dozen cases remain active.
State law now requires the governor's office to formalize the certification. which paves the way for the Trump campaign to pursue other legal options.
In Wisconsin, a recount of 2 heavily Democratic counties requested and paid for by the Trump campaign continues this weekend. Election officials hope to complete it by Thanksgiving. And as the president focuses on fighting the election results, the coronavirus continues to sweep through his inner circle.
Now, this is why it's so terrible. And this is why this president's going to go down in history as one of the worst. Because the number one issue in this election was the virus. And he's not focused on that. He's not trying to do all he can to save American lives right now. He's not even showing up to meetings. Let's watch what happens here.
White House aides have tested positive this week, as has Donald Trump Jr., asymptomatic and under quarantine.
You may have seen it by now, but apparently I got the Rona.
A G20 side meeting held virtually today on pandemic preparedness and response drew world leaders ranging from Saudi Arabia's king to Italy's prime minister.
The international community has faced a pandemic, which is unprecedented.
President Trump was on his golf course during the meeting, at which no Americans spoke.
He's playing golf while the virus is out of control. And the world leaders are trying to get the G20 are the top 20 economies in the world. And they're trying to plan worldwide strategy for this. And he just leaves and goes out and plays golf. He's been playing golf for the last 20 days. Listen, this is like, back in ancient Rome, where Nero was accused of fiddling as Rome burned in a big fire. We've got a real issue here with the virus. Let's show you how the world's looking at this. Failed presidents. Look at the United States. Look at our numbers. They're just totally off the charts. The number one country being affected more than any other. Utah, we're going through our problems right now. You can just see it in the numbers, see it in the stats. And what's our president doing to help? He's playing golf. Missing meetings, worrying about the election results instead of worrying about American lives. At a time when he should be encouraging all of his supporters to wear masks, to help. I mean, we got outbreaks in all these red states now, beyond anything you can imagine. North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, their governors now, Republican governors saying, look, mask mandates, it's required. Utah, mask mandates required. It's the only defense we've got for the next 4 or 5 months. That and social distancing and wiping down your desks and washing your hands, all that stuff matters now more than ever. And instead, he's tweeting mean tweets about losing an election. Okay, so let's take a look at this guy. And it's really kind of an important comment this morning from this guy. His name's Chris Christie. Now, you remember Chris Christie because I taught you about him. He's one of my favorite guys. Now, he was a big supporter of Trump, worked on his campaign, both the first and second one. He was the guy helping Trump prepare for that debate that he turned into a disaster. The thing is, this guy was in that Rose Garden when they did the Amy Coney Barrett rollout and turned into that super spreader. He gets the virus, ends up in the hospital on a ventilator. He makes it out. This is like number one Trump supporter guy. And here's what he had to tell the president this morning. Here we go.
They allege fraud outside the courtroom, but when they go inside the courtroom, they don't plead fraud and they don't argue fraud. If you're unwilling to come forward and present the evidence, it must mean the evidence doesn't exist. The country is what has to matter the most. As much as I'm a strong Republican and I love my party, it's the country that has to come first. What's happened here is, quite frankly, the conduct of the president's legal team has been a national embarrassment. I've been a supporter of the president's. I voted for him twice. But elections have consequences, and we cannot continue to act as if something happened here that didn't happen. You have an obligation to present the evidence. The evidence has not been presented.
Okay, so he's also a former prosecutor. Before he became the governor of the state of New Jersey. And the thing about it is what he's talking about is one of the president's lawyers named Rudy Giuliani, who nobody can understand what has happened to Giuliani. Giuliani, back when 9/11 happened, became known as America's mayor. Why? He was mayor of New York City, which is, by the way, twice as big as the population of the state of Utah. So it's a big job. It's an important job. He handled himself with great dignity then. And he became a national hero, but boy, has he fallen. And now he's taking up these impossible cases. And here's what's happening. You guys remember freedom of speech, right? You can say whatever you want to the cameras. You can lie to the American people all you want, but you cannot lie in court. If you present false evidence knowingly, as a lawyer, you'll be disbarred and you won't be able to practice law anymore. Courts only want to hear the truth. That's their job, is to find the truth. So they can't have people knowingly coming in and lying. It's called perjury. It's a crime. And that's why when they go to court, they say one thing, but when they're out in public, they say another. Look, 70% of Republican voters think that the president won the election, that it was stolen. Are you kidding me? The president needs to acknowledge he lost and bring the country together. This is just crazy behavior. It really, truly is. Let's go ahead and look at Giuliani's crazy behavior.
Well, good evening once again. Day 1400 of the Trump administration, 62 days now until the inauguration. It's been 16 days since the presidential election, 12 days since the race was called for President-elect Joe Biden. As the incumbent president escalates his campaign to overturn the results of the election, there is new confirmation tonight of Biden's victory in an important state. Tonight, Georgia released the results of its 6-day hand recount of the state's 5 million presidential votes, and Biden remains the winner in Georgia. State has until Friday to certify the results, though by law, the Trump campaign can still request another recount. Trump's effort to subvert the election results has taken on a new and more dangerous and ominous turn. As the Washington Post puts it tonight, quote, "The president is now trying to remain in power with a wholesale assault on the integrity of the vote." That gets us to today, and today may be remembered when all the craziness is over for one thing, and it's this visual. Rudy Giuliani's hair dye started.
So here's the visual, right? While he's ranting for an hour and a half in front of the cameras about non-existent fraud that he doesn't dare claim in a court of law, his hair dye starts to run on both sides of his cheeks. And it's like, oh my goodness, right? This would be laughable if it wasn't what he was saying was so sad. And to see this, what once was a hero in the United States, to turn into this pathetic situation, why would he do this to himself? Why would he do this to his family? Why would he do this to his country? I don't get it. But here he is, Rudy Giuliani, once a national hero, a national treasure, has now fallen. Wow, it's so sad.
Started dripping down his face after an outbreak of flop sweat during a press conference which will only be remembered for conspiracy theories and dark liquid. It was rambling, repugnant, reprehensible, hysterical. And as the man just fired by Trump for protecting the security of our election said on Twitter today, it was the most dangerous 1 hour, 45 minutes of television in American history.
Now listen, look up here, because again, I'm not going to make you go back and listen to previous lectures for your study guide. But remember the guy that the president fired a week ago, the guy responsible to make sure our elections were secure, who came out and said, yes, they were secure, they were accurate, the election went really, really well. It was the most secure election in American history. That guy that Mr. Trump fired, well, he said that press conference was the most dangerous 1 hour, 45 minutes of television in American history, and possibly the craziest. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're lucky. Where we have a once great American hero, Rudy Giuliani, not abiding by our democratic processes and lying to the American people over and over and over again.
Indeed, the dark seepage almost overshadowed what we heard at that press conference with the last lawyers left in America willing to defend the president.
Joe Biden is in the lead because of the fraudulent ballots, the illegal ballots that were produced and that were allowed to be used after the election was over. Give us an opportunity to prove it in court, and we will. You couldn't possibly believe that the company counting our vote, with control over our vote, is owned by two Venezuelans who were allies of Chavez, are present allies of Maduro, with a company whose chairman is a close associate and business partner of George Soros. the biggest donor to the Democrat Party, the biggest donor to Antifa, and the biggest donor to Black Lives Matter. I know crimes. I can smell them.
Hope you followed that. There was also this when Giuliani tried to illustrate his debunked allegation that Republican election observers were too forced to stand too far from vote counters.
Did you all watch My Cousin Vinny? You know the movie? It's one of my favorite war movies because he comes from Brooklyn. And when the nice lady who said she saw, and then he says to her, how many fingers do I got up? And she says, 3. Well, she was too far away to see it was only 2. These people were further away than my cousin Vinny was from the witness. They couldn't see a thing.
Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, that event was blessed by the Republican Party, was indeed held at their headquarters. Looking at these visuals, which again will, for right or wrong, tell the story of today when we look back.
Yeah, it will tell the story of today, and it'll be a sad visual for history. And we'll look back on this as what is Trump trying to achieve? To overturn the will of the people, a vote that he lost by 6 million votes and a whopping percentage in a re-incumbent election. It's just sad. And we'll kind of wrap it up with this. Finally now, joining Mitt Romney are a few Republicans, not many yet, that are saying, look, enough is enough. And so let's go ahead and play this last little clip. And you can see, like Chris Christie, I mean, a few days after Romney, he came out and said, enough is enough. Let's listen to some more, including Larry Hogan, Republican governor of Maryland.
To politics now, a defiant President Trump took to Twitter today, again contesting the outcome of the election that he lost. At the same time, some Republicans are expressing frustration with his refusal to accept defeat. CBS's Chip Reed is at the White House.
On the golf course today, President Trump took a break for several minutes to talk on the phone. He was probably not talking to Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan, who said this today about the president's efforts to change the election outcome.
We're beginning to look like we're a banana republic.
The president fired.
Now, Banana Republic, just so you know, and it's kind of important, in Central America, where they grow a lot of bananas, was run by a lot of dictators for all the way through the 1900s. And they would basically fake elections to make sure they won again and again and again, like they do in Russia, right? Putin decides, I'm going to win by 75% and everything magically does. That's what dictators do. And we're looking like a banana republic where, you know, we have a leader that's saying, oh, I win even though he lost, right? It's like what happened to Ukraine. Remember Ukraine? That president stuffed the ballot boxes. The people said no and they had those big protests. That's what happens in dictatorships. And now notice what we'll go back and we'll play Governor Hogan, who's really just a great guy. He's now emerging as one of my favorite Republican governors because he's brave enough, like Romney, to stand up to a president who's out of control.
We're beginning to look like we're a banana republic.
The president fired back at Hogan, tweeting, "This Republican in name only will never make the grade," to which Hogan responded, "Stop golfing and concede." The president was also probably not chatting with Republican Chris Christie.
The conduct of the president's legal team has been a national embarrassment.
In Pennsylvania, a federal judge rejected the president's election lawsuit, comparing it to Frankenstein's monster, haphazardly stitched together. Pennsylvania conservative Republican Senator Pat Toomey described the judge as a longtime conservative Republican and wrote, "I congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris on their victory." Despite the growing number of critics, most Republicans are still quietly supporting the president in his largely unsuccessful quest to overturn the election. Some, though, are speaking out, like Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota.
I don't know why we're so easily offended by a president that's carrying out all of his legal options.
But even he said it's now time for the president to start sharing information with Joe Biden.
It was past time to start a transition, to at least cooperate with the transition.
Today.
And it's so important because of the stakes. On January 20th, the Biden team has got to take charge of the economy, which is in a bad state, and of the distribution of the vaccine, and of getting through the last days, hopefully, with luck, fingers crossed, of this virus, which will basically occupy a year and a half of our lives, right? You guys face it every day, and you're looking at heroes every day. Those teachers that come in and are with you every day, they're heroes. There's no question about it. The people who are in the hospitals, swamped, have had no sleep, have had to deal with this now for months and months and months, are heroes, right? These are our new national heroes. We're in a war, and we are literally losing a person every minute. Now, saying that, look, here's the deal. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why I'm giving you a different essay if you want to use it. And I would think, right, that for those of you that, politically, you're finding Trump's actions just even too weird to write about, or if you're a Trump supporter and you just don't know what to think at this point, that we need to give you a non-political essay. And this one's really a good one because the race for the vaccine is an historic effort. Now, you might have to go back to the last lecture a little bit because I set that up, explained a little bit about this essay and also in that video to parents. But let's kind of get an update from what I talked about. Remember, you have to do it from a world organization. And this is what's so offensive about the president playing golf when 20 of the world's leaders are trying to figure out what do we do to vaccinate basically 65% of the world population. Because we have a vaccine breakthrough in the States, that doesn't mean other places aren't having those same breakthroughs. 170 different teams are working on vaccines. There's going to be multiple vaccines. One of them is going to be better than the rest, but they can't make them all so very fast. It takes forever to get these in process and to get out to the 8 billion people. And what if we have to do it, by the way, every 6 months because it's only effective for a short period of time? Okay, so all that logistics has got to be figured out. And I am so glad that Biden won this election. And I'll tell you why. I don't trust this guy who's playing golf right now to be over getting that vaccine to everybody that needs it. So I'll just be upfront. I am so glad he lost because he's not shown any real competence to actually govern. He plays golf and he tweets. Let's go ahead and look at the race for the vaccine. And this could be your alternative to get out of this nightmare political situation and worrying about something that's really going to be positive and going to go down as one of the great achievements of science in world history.
Hope on the horizon. The first coronavirus vaccine was just submitted to the FDA for emergency approval. That process, something of a mystery to many. So tonight, we're giving you an inside look at how the agency will make its decision and how quickly. Here's Kathy Park.
Tonight, Pfizer and BioNTech's emergency authorization request for a COVID-19 vaccine is in the hands of the FDA, setting the clock on an approval process that begins now.
Typically, how long does that process take?
Well, there's no typical under these circumstances.
We talked to former FDA officials and advisors who've been through this process before.
Well, the companies will present a great dossier of all their information to the Food and Drug Administration, and their internal experts will then start to review it. But very quickly.
This data includes results of more than 40,000 trial participants and 2 months of safety follow-ups. By early.
Now, do you remember that I showed you phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials and how that works? And there were 12 different groups that got to phase 3. Well, a couple of those now are through phase 3, which includes, a lot of people and making sure the vaccine doesn't have harmful side effects. Now, here's the deal. Right now, only about 50% of Americans are willing to take this vaccine because they're seeing it as political motivated instead of, science generated. So these companies have got to prove that it's safe and effective, or people aren't going to want to take it. So let's drop back just a little bit. And these are a few companies now in this country that have gotten through the phase 3. So here we go.
Experts will then start to review it, but very quickly.
This data includes results of more than 40,000 trial participants and 2 months of safety follow-ups. By early December, they'll present their evaluation to an independent advisory committee,
which are some of the top vaccine scientists from around the country, and that will be public.
It's a very rigorous process by independent experts.
The discussions will be streamed live, providing full transparency.
We want to be very confident before it is used widely that the vaccine doesn't have any unexpected side effects.
The vaccine is enormously important. There's not a lot of room for errors.
Those hearings will likely last just a few days.
And then FDA will make a final decision, probably pretty quickly.
After the FDA grants a company emergency use,
Now the question is, who ought to receive it? And so the baton gets passed to the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And in this instance, will be done very, very quickly.
The CDC likely to determine healthcare workers, first responders, and older adults get the vaccine first. Doses could then be distributed immediately.
Okay, so that's kind of where we want to leave it, because the truth of the matter is if you're going to do this alternative essay, you may want to go back a little bit and listen to just what I talked about in lecture 28 about the COVID research paper. And so catch that, then jump ahead and do this as a non-political essay in a very political time. All right, well, as Mr. Trump continues to embarrass himself and bury his legacy in history, right, where did all this scientific thought come from? And so what we're going to do is, again, I'm not going to have you search back through a bunch of previous lectures to find the answers to the next study guides. We're starting from here. So I reviewed like Krebs, the guy that he fired who was responsible for election security. You know who Rudy Giuliani is now. Anything I talked about today forward, also, didn't I tell you too that Biden got 306 electoral votes, and by the way, won by 51%, and by the way, got over 6 million more votes than President Trump. Those are things you're going to have to know, okay, for the next study guide. What you're also going to have to know is that our scientific Western civilization society that we live in, scientific oriented, really got a jumpstart in Europe around the time the printing press was created, because then we have people writing about things that the religious books were the first things printed. But then after that, people are looking at different things. And you have people like Galileo, who you know about, right? Who's saying, hey, I got a newsflash, maybe with Copernicus, let's get together and realize that the earth is not the center of the universe, right? Things like that. Kepler, all these scientists are trying to prove all these new scientific things. The scientific method is born. Now, it's a lot of these scientific thinkers that also reinvent politics. They're the ones that come up with this idea of freedom of the press, freedom of the speech, and all this kind of stuff. And this is a review, so you don't have to pick through that last lecture. But basically, this area is called the Age of Enlightenment. Now the printing press has been out for about 150 years. There's lots of books being published. Literacy is way up. People are learning more and more about lots of things, including governments. So from the 1600s, 1790s, just in that window where the United States was born in a revolution and starting to be led in the first, the longest lasting, most successful written constitution in world history. Now, did you hear what I just said? The US Constitution is the longest lasting written constitution in world history. Where did we get the ideas for that? It came from these guys. French, some English, but mainly French Enlightenment figures who gave us these concepts of freedom of the press, freedom of speech, the right of the people to vote. Nobody was voting before these guys. There weren't votes. There were divine right of kings, dictators, like banana republics. There wasn't any freedom that we would call freedoms. These people defined our freedoms. And they did it in the 1600s and 1790s. So now look, many of these are also scientists. So they did basic science. Americans that are on this list, by the way, we'll show that later, are Thomas Jefferson, who was a major scientific thinker, biology and invention. And then you look at Ben Franklin, right? You look at Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, the denial of dictators and monarchy and why they should fail. Those three are on this list, and all of them were scientists. Okay, as well as, doing their day job, like being president of the United States in the case of Jefferson. They include Bacon, Descartes, Hobbes, Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Spinoza, Bayle, Hutchinson, Newton, Isaac Newton. He was kind of important to science, but also to this discussion. David Hume, Beccaria, Immanuel Kant, and eventually Karl Marx. All of these are the people that led us as a European community coming to America in what we call Western thought. All right, now, the first one we talked about already in cohort A, but I'm going to review so nobody has to go back and piece this out, was Thomas Hobbes, who grew up in this very tumultuous time during the Civil War in England, where Parliament was saying, we need to run the country, not the king. And the king saying, I'm a divine right of kings. I have all but the power. And guess what? Well, Parliament won that argument. The king lost his head, quite literally. And over time, we now have a constitutional monarchy of limited checks and balances on the king. All right, well, in that time, he's writing a book called Leviathan, in which he defines a new kind of concept for people to think about. What were people like before government, when they were just wandering around doing their early people thing? And he defined it as pretty bad situation, anarchy, chaos, everybody living in fear, and he has this very famous quote, which I've asked you to memorize: life without government is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, the reason I'm reviewing this is cohort B didn't get this far, so we're reviewing that with them. Well, this discussion kicked off a wider discussion about what life was like before government and what government should be set up to make life better for people. And the next big thinker that really influenced the Americas was John Locke in 1679. He wrote this book called The Second Treatise on Civil Government. You need to know that. The Second Treatise on Government is worth spending some time on. Unfortunately, this semester, we're going to have to be very brief. So let's go through quickly what he said. Life in the state of nature is so chaotic and so terrible, in his view, that it makes him willing to quit this condition, which, however free, look, you're free to do whatever you want. But if everybody else is free to do whatever they want, then that means your world is full of fears and continual dangers. It is not without reason, then, that this person before civilization seeks out and is willing to join in society with others who are already united or have a mind to unite for the mutual preservation. And watch this line here. This is the key part: lives, liberties, and estates, which he meant property. So life, liberty, and property was what was defined by Locke. Now, part of the problem is, we go with the life part, life, liberty, and then we stopped there because basically he justified slavery. He actually wrote the Constitution for the early colony of North Carolina, where he said, people can own slaves. That's okay, because property is a right. What? People are property? So we kind of leave him behind, thank goodness. And Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner himself, who could have easily said this, but didn't, he chose to take from ancient Greek philosophy, Epicureanism, that the purpose of life is happiness. And notice the sequence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. First of all, you have to defend people's lives. Then we're free to expand our freedoms, and then those freedoms should lead to greater happiness. That's kind of how it works. It can't go in reverse. You can't sit there and say, everybody gets to do what they want and pursue whatever happiness they want, even if it means taking away somebody else's freedoms, and even if it means other people lose their lives. It doesn't work that way. You can only go one direction here: life first, liberty second, pursuit of happiness as a result. All right, well, there's a lot more there, but what we have to do is now shift gears and talk about Dennis Diderot. Now, this guy and a group of others did the first compilation of science and knowledge ever, and it's called the Encyclopedia. When I was a kid, we had these huge encyclopedias in the library, and you go, when you're doing your research paper, you go and you copy from there, just like you cut and paste from Wikipedia, right? Raise your hand if you've ever cut and paste from Wikipedia and put it in a research paper, maybe forgot to give credit to that. Raise your hand. You ever done it? Oh, come on, you've all done it, right? We've all done that. Don't do that. For this research paper, just say, hey, look, I stole this information from Wikipedia, and then it's okay. It's not plagiarism. You're not stealing if you give credit, right? Well, we used to copy this. This was the Wikipedia of its day. He had a 35-volume encyclopedia encompassing all the known knowledge of the day. Now, obviously, of course, Wikipedia is better because it's unlimited amount of knowledge today, right? What knowledge, doubles every year. But back then, 25,000 copies sold. So only rich people could afford it. But nevertheless, people were reading now from A to Z everything there was to know. And in this environment where knowledge is expanding, where people are becoming more literate, where they're learning more about science, Voltaire emerges. And he is a literary figure like none other in human history. We don't somehow talk about him enough in US education systems, but he was the most recognized man of letters around the world in this early time period around the American Revolution. Now, Voltaire wrote a dictionary in philosophy. He wrote a composition set of articles about the English and comparing English and French society. He wrote great literary works like Candide. By the way, it'll only take you 2 hours to read. It's one of the great texts, great little books you've ever want to read, talking about the meaning of life and happiness. But these revolutionary texts were really important. And we did in this class, I believe, go through some of his quotes, but we didn't do it in cohort B, and the online students didn't see it. So we're going to review some of those right now. Again, I'm not going to make you go back and listen to previous lectures, right? Start from here. Man is free at the moment he wishes to be. You think about it. If every slave in America, all 4.5 million of them, just said, we're not going to be slaves anymore, the slavery is over. There's social structures that force this on people, that keep them in bondage, right? Man is free at the moment he wishes to be. Oh, to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticize. You know, like Chris Krebs, who basically said, oh no, the elections were fair and they were honest, and I'm the guy responsible for that. And I know you appointed me, Mr. President, but I did my job. He gets fired. If you criticize Trump, you get fired, like 4 secretaries of defense, including the last one, who said, look, we shouldn't be just pulling troops out at the last minute just for some political purpose, gets fired. To know who rules over you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticize. Kind of a powerful quote. It is difficult to free fools from the chains they revere. Look, here's the deal, right? There's still people out there that don't believe masks work. They bought into a foolish idea and they don't want to let go because it might think, oh my goodness, maybe I was wrong. It's okay to be wrong. One thing about science is that you do the experiment and you find out you're wrong. Then you go, oh, I was wrong. Let's go on and make the next step in science then. So that one's kind of important. And then let's go to the next one. Every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. Now you look at all the good Mr. Trump could be doing right now that he's not doing. Think about that for a second. Every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. If he wanted to still be president, he should have told his supporters back in March, wear masks, socially distance, do everything that we're asking you to do for your own safety and security for your life. And then, even if he lost, if he'd have said, oh, okay, Biden, we're going to help you transition. We got these great improvements in vaccines. Let me make sure that gets off to a good start, that everybody, and he would be heralded and remembered as a hero, not as the person he's become, the person in the middle of a pandemic who's playing golf and worrying about his own political future and not the future of Americans. Every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. And that, again, is Voltaire. And then the comfort of the rich depends on an abundant supply of the poor. He starts talking about income inequality. And this is an important topic that we hopefully will have time to talk about before the end. And then this now very important quote. I might disagree with your opinion, but I'm willing to give my life for a right to express it. Rudy Giuliani, if you want to get out and lie to the cameras for an hour and 45 minutes and tell them these conspiracy theories that have no merit, whatever, go ahead. I defend your right to do it. But when you go into a court of law where the truth matters and you can't lie to a court because it's a felony, why does he change his story? Because he doesn't want to lose his law license. Look, say what you want, Mr. Giuliani. Mr. Trump, tweet whatever you want. You're right. But there's consequences to your lies. And it may be why he lost the presidency, because he lied about the virus. He lied about its dangers. He lied about wearing masks. He held these super spreader events again and again and again. And over again, we see it hitting the White House. If you can't defend the White House, how can you defend the country from coronavirus? And he's no longer going to be our president. All right, well, all the ideas of these great thinkers, right, that we've just talked about, had an influence on France too. It influenced all of Western Europe. Every one of these countries in Western Europe will abandon, for the most part, will abandon monarchy or make it a very limited thing, like in England, where the Queen has very little power. It's Parliament that runs it, because of this period of thought. So when we get to the Estates General in France in 1789, the same year that Washington takes the oath of office, that very same year, in a financial crisis, you have the old order, the nobility in the church that want all the power, but don't want to pay any taxes and want to give it the taxes to this rising business class. That business class says, we'll help. We love France too, but you got to let us vote. And when they were told no, a revolution starts. Oh yeah, and the king wasn't paying attention to the number one issue of the day in France, and that was there'd been 2 bad harvests in a row and people were hungry. They were going without bread. Don't you think you should address that issue first? And so France erupted in a revolution that would span, by the time it's over, 25 years. The United States has the longest continuous constitution in the United States. Do you know how many constitutions France had in its first 25 years? About 5, because of the turmoil. So we're pretty lucky, and they weren't. They went through this crisis because the people wanted a say. And the old order, the conservative forces of the status quo, weren't allowed to have that happen. So that's when we get our definitions of left and right, those that want change and those that want to keep the status quo. Now, the next person in our important discussion of the rights of man and the freedoms we now take for granted was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who came up with a very important thing called the social contract theory. The social contract theory defines the relationship between a government and its people, right? And so this is going to be profoundly influential. He would write several books, but one was important called The Discourse of the Origin of Inequality, where he lays out all these principles. And this was written in 1754, which is well ahead of the American Revolution. So that means it's going to be printed, cross the Atlantic, and be widely read here among the educated elite. Okay, so Jean-Jacques Rousseau, there's some of the famous quotes from Rousseau. So you might want to, read some of his works later this summer, put them on your summer reading list. Ye are undone if ye once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all and the earth itself to nobody. That fundamental truth that you can't take it with you, right? Men are born free, yet everywhere they are in chains. This was written, of course, before the serfs had been freed in Europe, where there were still peasants that owed fealty to a lord and had to work for him a certain number of days a year. And there was still slavery abounding, especially in the Americas. Men are born free. That was kind of the outcome of the discussion between Hobbes and Locke and all these other philosophers, is that originally man in the state of nature was born free. What happened to that freedom? And that's what he writes about in this book now called The Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. Okay, well, perfect place to stop. We'll just stop right there and see you next time.